Sometimes losing everything is how we find what we never knew we were looking for. When 12-year-old Miriam Harper lost her parents, then her grandmother, she thought the old farm in Montana was just another burden to bear. She arrives with one small bag and a heart full of grief. The farmhouse looks empty. The land feels forgotten. But when night falls, she sees them watching from the woods, golden eyes, silent paws, creatures that shouldn't be there. 200 wolves call this place home. They've been waiting. Her grandmother kept their secret for decades, just like her great-grandmother before her. Now it's Miriam's turn to learn the truth about her family's ancient promise. The developers want the land. The wolves need protection, and Miriam must choose between running away or becoming something she never imagined. But what happens when a lonely child discovers she's been chosen to guard magic itself? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The canvas satchel felt heavier with each step Miriam took toward the weathered farmhouse. 3 days had passed since her grandmother's funeral. 3 days of paperwork, condolences from strangers, and the growing realization that at 12 years old, she was truly alone in the world. The social worker, Mrs. Holloway, had been kind enough. A woman in her 50s, with gentle eyes and sensible shoes, she'd explained the situation with careful patience. Your grandmother left very specific instructions, dear. The farm is yours now, held in trust until you're 18. She insisted you'd want to live there. Miriam hadn't understood then. She'd never even met her grandmother properly. Just a few awkward phone calls on birthdays and Christmas, a woman's voice that seemed to echo from another world. Her parents had rarely spoken of the old woman who lived alone on a farm somewhere in Montana. She keeps to herself, her mother would say, a shadow passing over her face. Some people are meant for solitude. Now, standing before the 2-story farmhouse with its peeling white paint and sagging front porch, Miriam wondered if solitude was hereditary. The house looked like it had been holding its breath for years, waiting for someone to come home. Mrs. Holloway emerged from a dusty sedan, brushing travel wrinkles from her cardigan. I know it looks a bit rough around the edges, but the structure is sound. Your grandmother may have been reclusive, but she maintained the important things. She gestured toward the house with forced cheer. And look at all that space. Most children would be thrilled to have their own farm. Miriam wasn't most children. She'd spent her 12 years in a small apartment in Seattle with parents who worked long hours and believed in the comfort of city conveniences. The silence here was overwhelming. No traffic, no neighbors arguing through thin walls, no familiar sounds of life continuing around her. Just wind through tall grass and the distant call of birds she couldn't name. The lawyer, Mr. Davidson, will be by tomorrow to discuss some business matters, Mrs. Holloway continued, unlocking the front door with a brass key that looked older than Miriam herself. He mentioned something about development interest in the area. Quite valuable, this land, apparently. The door creaked open, releasing the scent of lavender and old wood. Sunlight filtered through dusty windows, illuminating a living room frozen in time. Handmade quilts draped over worn furniture. Photographs of people Miriam didn't recognize lined the mantelpiece. And books, so many books, filled shelves that reached from floor to ceiling. She was quite the reader. Your grandmother, Mrs. Holloway observed, running her finger along a shelf spine. Margaret Harper. The few times I met her in town, she was always carrying a book. Kept mostly to herself, but folks respected her. Said she had a way with animals. Miriam set her satchel down by the door and wandered deeper into the house. The kitchen smelled of herbs and something earthy she couldn't identify. Mason jars filled with dried plants lined the windowsills, their contents ranging from familiar mint and basil to twisted roots and dark leaves that seemed to shift in the afternoon light. Now, I'll be honest with you, Miriam, Mrs. Holloway said, her voice taking on the careful tone adults used when delivering unwelcome news. Living out here alone isn't ideal for someone your age. The nearest neighbor is miles away, and the school district is quite far. I'll need to do regular check-ins, and if this arrangement doesn't work out, it'll work out. Miriam said quickly, though she wasn't sure why. Something about the house felt right, despite its strangeness, like putting on clothes that fit perfectly but belonged to someone else. Mrs. Holloway studied her with kind but worried eyes. "You're sure?" "I know this has all been overwhelming, losing your parents in that accident, then your grandmother so soon after. There are other options. Foster families who would—" "I'm sure." The words came out stronger than Miriam felt. She'd spent the last 6 months being passed between relatives who saw her as an obligation, staying in spare rooms where she never quite belonged. This house might be lonely, but it was hers. After Mrs. Holloway left with promises to return in a week, Miriam explored her inheritance room by room. Her grandmother's bedroom was simple. An iron-framed bed covered with another handmade quilt, a dresser topped with photographs of a young woman who must have been Margaret in her youth. Beautiful and serious, with dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold secrets. The second bedroom had clearly been prepared for Miriam's arrival. Clean sheets, fresh towels, and on the nightstand, a note in careful handwriting. "Welcome home, dear one. Look for the truth in the kitchen drawer. The wolves are waiting." Miriam read the note 3 times before the words truly registered. Wolves. She'd seen the vast wilderness stretching beyond the farm's boundaries, but surely there weren't actually wolves here. The note must be metaphorical, the rambling of an elderly woman who'd lived alone too long. But as she searched the kitchen drawers for whatever truth her grandmother had mentioned, the explanation seemed less and less metaphorical. In the deep drawer beside the sink, beneath dish towels and trivets, her fingers found leather, a journal bound in soft brown hide and worn smooth by countless hands. She opened it carefully, half expecting the pages to crumble. Instead, she found entries in her grandmother's precise script, dating back decades. March 15th, 1987. "The alpha approached the south fence again today. Growing bolder. The pack knows change is coming. Must prepare the next guardian soon." June 3rd, 1994. Sarah writes that Margaret, my daughter, is pregnant. "Perhaps this child will carry the gift." The wolves sense new life. They wait with ancient patience. October 12th, 2003. Margaret's daughter shows no signs yet. Too young, perhaps, or the gift skipped a generation. The covenant grows thin. I grow old. December 1st, 2011. Margaret and her husband died today. Car accident. The child, Miriam, she's the last of our line. God help her. God help us all. Miriam's hands trembled as she read. Her grandmother had known about her parents' death months before anyone told her. Had been tracking her life from a distance, watching and waiting for something Miriam didn't understand. The final entry was dated just a week ago. January 8th, 2012. My time is ending. Miriam comes home tomorrow. The wolves have been restless. They sense the changing of the guard. I pray she's stronger than she knows. The covenant has protected this land for 6 generations. She is the 7th. The magic runs deep in 7th daughters. Miriam closed the journal and sank into a kitchen chair as understanding began to dawn. Her grandmother hadn't been a recluse by choice. She'd been a guardian of something, keeper of secrets that apparently now belonged to Miriam. As if summoned by her thoughts, a low howl echoed across the grassland. Then another, and another, until the evening air filled with a symphony of wild voices calling to each other in the gathering dusk. Miriam walked to the kitchen window and peered out into the growing darkness. At first, she saw nothing but swaying grass and the dark line of trees that marked the property's edge. Then, as her eyes adjusted, she saw them, shapes moving through the grass. Dozens of them flowing like liquid shadow toward the house. Not stalking, not hunting, approaching with purpose and patience, as if they'd been waiting for this moment their entire lives, the largest of them. A massive grey wolf with intelligent yellow eyes stopped at the edge of the yard and sat on its haunches. It looked directly at the kitchen window, directly at Miriam, and she could swear she saw recognition in its gaze. The canvas satchel by the front door suddenly seemed insignificant. Whatever she'd thought she was bringing to this place, whatever plans she'd had for her new life, they were nothing compared to what was already here. waiting for her to understand. The wolf howled once more, a sound that seemed to echo not just across the land, but through time itself. And somewhere deep in her chest, Miriam felt an answering call she'd never known existed. Miriam woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar curtains and the sound of voices outside. For a moment she forgot where she was. The bed was too soft, the air too quiet, the ceiling too far away. Then memory returned with the weight of her grandmother's journal, which she'd fallen asleep reading. The voices grew louder, accompanied by the slam of car doors. Miriam hurried to the window and saw a black sedan parked in the drive. Two men in expensive suits stood beside it, one pointing toward the tree line while the other made notes on a clipboard. She dressed quickly and made her way downstairs, pausing at the kitchen window to look for any sign of the wolves from the night before. The yard was empty, except for the two strangers, who were now walking directly toward the house. The knock came as she was putting water on for tea, a habit she'd learned from her mother, who'd always said that morning tea helped make sense of difficult things. Miss Harper. The taller of the two men smiled when she opened the door, but his eyes remained calculating. "I'm Robert Davidson, your grandmother's attorney. This is my associate, Mr. Phillips. We spoke with your social worker yesterday." Miriam nodded, though she remembered Mrs. Holloway mentioning only one lawyer, not two. "She said you had business to discuss." "Indeed we do." Davidson's smile widened as he gestured toward the land around them. "Quite a property you've inherited. Your grandmother was sitting on a gold mine, as they say." Phillips consulted his clipboard. "Preliminary surveys suggest significant mineral deposits throughout the eastern section. With proper development, this land could be worth millions." "Development?" Miriam stepped outside, pulling the door closed behind her. Something about these men made her want to keep them away from her grandmother's house, from the journal and its secrets. "Strip mining, primarily," Davidson explained. "There's a consortium of companies very interested in purchasing the property. Of course, you're too young to make such decisions yourself, but I'm sure we can work with your social worker to arrange something beneficial for everyone." Miriam felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. "My grandmother left the land to me. Temporarily, yes, but maintaining a property this size is expensive, and frankly, a young girl living alone out here raises certain concerns." Davidson's tone remained friendly, but there was steel underneath. "Much better to sell now, invest the money properly, and purchase something more suitable when you come of age." "I like it here," Miriam said. Surprised by her own certainty, Phillips laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "You've been here one night. Trust me, the novelty will wear off quickly. No internet, no cell service, no neighbors for miles. What happens if you get sick? Have an emergency? I'll manage. Children often think they're more capable than they are," Davidson said, his patience beginning to fray. "This isn't a decision you can make emotionally. There are practical considerations." A low growl interrupted his words. All three of them turned toward the sound, and Miriam's breath caught in her throat. The alpha wolf from the night before stood at the edge of the yard, its yellow eyes fixed on the two men. It was even larger than she'd remembered, easily the size of a small horse with silver-gray fur that seemed to shimmer in the morning light. Philip stumbled backward, reaching inside his jacket. "Jesus Christ, what is that thing?" "It's just a dog," Davidson said, but his voice was tight with fear. "Probably wild. These rural areas are full of strays." The wolf, definitely not a dog, took 3 measured steps forward. It made no aggressive moves, showed no teeth, but its presence radiated a warning that needed no translation. Behind it, other shapes emerged from the tree line, dozens of them forming a loose semicircle around the yard. "I think you should leave," Miriam said quietly. Davidson tore his gaze away from the wolves long enough to glare at her. "This conversation isn't over. We'll be back with proper authorization, and something will need to be done about these animals. They're clearly dangerous." "They're not dangerous," Miriam said, though she wasn't sure how she knew this. "They're protecting their home." "This isn't their home anymore," Philip snapped, backing toward the car. "This is valuable real estate, and we're not going to let a pack of wild animals interfere with legitimate business." They retreated to their sedan, engines revving as they sped down the dirt road. The wolves watched them go with patient intensity, not moving until the car disappeared over the horizon. Only then did the alpha turn its attention back to Miriam. She stood frozen on the porch steps, acutely aware that she was alone with creatures that could tear her apart without effort. But instead of fear, she felt something else, a strange recognition, as if she was remembering something she'd forgotten long ago. The alpha wolf approached slowly, each step deliberate and careful. When it reached the bottom of the porch steps, it sat and looked up at her with those remarkable eyes. Up close, she could see flecks of gold in the yellow irises and something that looked unmistakably like intelligence. "You were here before I was born, weren't you?" she whispered. The wolf tilted its head, and for a moment Miriam could swear it understood every word. She descended the steps carefully, her heart hammering against her ribs. The wolf remained perfectly still as she approached, even when she was close enough to see the rise and fall of its chest, close enough to smell the wild scent of forest and rain that clung to its fur. "My grandmother left me a journal," she said, feeling foolish for talking to an animal, but unable to stop herself. "She wrote about a covenant. About guardians and magic and responsibilities I don't understand." The wolf's ears pricked forward at the word covenant, and Miriam felt her breath catch. It did understand. Somehow, impossibly. It knew exactly what she was talking about. She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object she'd found tucked between the journal's pages, a silver pendant in the shape of a wolf's head, hanging from a delicate chain. The moment it touched the morning air, it began to glow with a soft, warm light. The alpha wolf's eyes widened, and a low whine escaped its throat, not threatening, but almost relieved, as if it had been waiting years to see that pendant again. This was hers, wasn't it? Miriam held the pendant up, watching the way the light seemed to pulse with her heartbeat. "My grandmother's, and before that, her grandmother's." The wolf rose to its feet and took a step closer. For a terrifying, wonderful moment, Miriam thought it might speak. Instead, it lowered its massive head and touched its nose gently to the pendant. The effect was instantaneous. Images flooded Miriam's mind, not her own memories, but older ones, passed down through generations of women who had stood in this same place, holding this same pendant, making promises to creatures who were more than animals. She saw her grandmother as a young woman, fierce and determined, facing down men who wanted to destroy the land for profit. She saw her great-grandmother before that, and women stretching back through time, all connected by the silver pendant and the sacred trust it represented. And underneath it all, she felt the presence of the wolves, constant, patient, eternal guardians of something precious that she was only beginning to understand. When the visions faded, Miriam found herself sitting on the ground with the alpha wolf beside her, its warm bulk solid and reassuring against her shoulder. The other wolves had drawn closer, forming a protective circle around them both. "I don't know how to do this," she whispered, tears streaming down her face. "I'm just a kid. I don't know anything about magic or covenants or being a guardian." The alpha wolf turned its great head toward her, and in its eyes she saw patience, wisdom, and something that might have been hope. As if it was saying, "You'll learn. We'll teach you. We've been waiting for you your whole life." The pendant grew warm against her palm, and Miriam understood that her childhood, whatever remained of it, was officially over. She was no longer just an orphaned girl with a canvas satchel and a heart full of grief. She was the seventh daughter of the seventh daughter, keeper of ancient promises, guardian of 200 wolves who had been waiting 12 years for her to come home. The question was whether she was brave enough to accept what that meant. The next 3 days passed in a blur of discovery and growing unease. Miriam threw herself into reading her grandmother's journal, trying to piece together the fragments of family history that had been hidden from her entire life. The entries painted a picture of women who had chosen duty over ordinary lives, solitude over companionship, and responsibility over freedom. "The seventh daughter carries the strongest gift," one entry read, "but also the heaviest burden. She will face the choice that determines whether the covenant survives another generation. Miriam wasn't sure what gift she was supposed to possess, but she was beginning to understand the burden. Each morning, she woke to find the wolves waiting at the edge of the yard, watching the house with patient intensity. They never approached during daylight hours, but their presence was constant, a reminder that she was no longer simply responsible for herself. It was while searching for more clues about this mysterious gift that she found the key, hidden in the journal's binding, sewn into the leather with threads so fine she'd almost missed them. Was a small brass key unlike any she'd ever seen. Its surface was covered with symbols that seemed to shift when she wasn't looking directly at them, spirals and crescents and shapes that reminded her of paw prints or bird wings. She'd searched the house twice before finding the lock it belonged to. Hidden behind a loose board in the pantry floor was a narrow wooden door, its brass lock green with age. The key turned with surprising ease, as if it had been waiting for her touch. The stairs beyond were steep and dark, carved directly into the stone foundation. Miriam retrieved a flashlight from the kitchen and descended carefully, her heart hammering with equal parts excitement and fear. The hidden room was larger than she'd expected, stretching beneath most of the house's foundation. The walls were lined with shelves holding artifacts that made her grandmother's journal look ordinary by comparison. Carved wooden masks, bundles of herbs tied with silver cord, crystals that caught her flashlight beam and threw rainbows across the stone walls. But it was the far wall that made her breath catch. Painted directly onto the stone in pigments that still seemed wet, after decades, was a massive mural depicting the history of her family's covenant with the wolves. She saw her ancestors, women with her own dark hair and serious eyes, standing beside wolves of incredible size and beauty. The paintings showed them working together through seasons and years, protecting something that glowed with soft golden light at the center of every scene. At the bottom of the mural, in letters that seemed to pulse with their own inner fire, were words in a language Miriam didn't recognize. But somehow she understood their meaning. Guard what cannot be replaced. Protect what must not be lost. Honor the covenant until the end of days. Magnificent, isn't it? Miriam spun around, her flashlight beam sweeping across the stairs where an elderly man stood watching her with kind eyes. He was Native American, perhaps in his 70s, with silver-streaked hair braided down his back and hands weathered by decades of outdoor work. "I'm sorry," he said, raising his hands peacefully when he saw her fear. "I didn't mean to startle you. I'm Tom Clearwater. I live about 2 miles east, near the creek. Your grandmother asked me to keep an eye on the place after she passed. How did you get in?" Miriam's voice came out shakier than she intended. "Same way I've been getting in for 40 years, through the kitchen window with the broken latch. Margaret never bothered to fix it. Said anyone meant to be here would find their way in, and anyone who wasn't meant to be here wouldn't make it past the wolves." Tom descended the stairs slowly, his movements careful and respectful. "She called me the night before she died. Said you'd be coming home soon, and I should introduce myself once you found this room. She knew you'd find it. The gift always draws the 7th daughter to the hidden places." "Everyone keeps talking about this gift," Miriam said, frustration coloring her voice. "But I don't feel gifted. I feel confused and scared and completely unprepared for any of this." Tom smiled, the expression transforming his weathered face. "That's exactly how your grandmother felt when she was your age, and her grandmother before her. The gift isn't something you're born knowing how to use. It's something you grow into, like a child growing into their parents' clothes." He gestured toward the mural. "My great-grandfather helped paint this, back when your great-great-grandmother first came to this land. She was a city woman like you, completely unprepared for what she'd inherited when she married into the Harper line." "Married into it?" "The women in your family aren't born guardians," Tom explained. "They choose to become guardians when they accept the responsibility. Usually it passes from mother to daughter, but sometimes, like now, it skips a generation. The wolves have been waiting for you since your grandmother was too old to fulfill her duties." Miriam sank onto a wooden crate, overwhelmed by the weight of history surrounding her. What exactly am I supposed to be guarding? The journal mentions the covenant, but it never says what we're protecting. Tom was quiet for a long moment, studying her face in the flashlight's glow. That's not my story to tell, but I can help you understand your part in it. He gestured toward the shelves. Your grandmother left instructions for your training. Said you'd need to learn fast, faster than any guardian before you. Why? What's the hurry? Because those men who came to see you yesterday weren't just developers, Tom said grimly. Davidson has been circling this property for years, waiting for Margaret to die. He knows there's something valuable here, something beyond mineral rights. And he's not going to give up just because a 12-year-old girl says no. As if summoned by his words, the sound of vehicles reached them from above, multiple engines moving fast across the rough terrain. Tom's expression darkened as he counted the sounds. More than yesterday. He's brought friends. They climbed the stairs quickly, emerging into a kitchen filled with afternoon sunlight that seemed harsh after the mystical twilight of the hidden room. Through the window, Miriam could see a convoy of trucks and SUVs approaching the house, kicking up clouds of dust that stained the clear air. Get the pendant, Tom said urgently, and anything else from the hidden room that feels important. We may need to leave quickly, but before Miriam could move, the vehicles stopped, and she saw the wolves emerging from the tree line. Not just the pack she'd seen before. Hundreds of them, flowing across the grassland like a grey tide. They moved with purpose and coordination that spoke of intelligence far beyond ordinary animals. The lead truck's engine died abruptly, followed by the others. Then the wolves began to howl, a sound that seemed to come from the earth itself, ancient and wild and absolutely uncompromising. They're protecting the house, Tom said with satisfaction. Davidson's men won't set foot on this property as long as the pack stands guard. Miriam watched through the window as suited figures emerged from the vehicles, only to freeze when they saw the sea of wolves surrounding them. Even from a distance she could see their fear. But they'll be back, she said, understanding beginning to dawn. With more men, more equipment, maybe weapons, Tom nodded grimly. Which is why you need to learn what your grandmother couldn't teach you before she died. The wolves can protect this land, but only if the Guardian knows how to guide them, and only if the Covenant remains strong. He turned to face her, his expression serious but kind. Are you ready to begin your real education, Miriam Harper? Because everything depends on how quickly you can become the guardian these wolves and this land need you to be. Tom proved to be a patient teacher, but his lessons were unlike anything Miriam had learned in school. Instead of textbooks, he showed her documents so old they seemed to exhale history with every careful turning of their pages. The most important was a treaty written on parchment that felt more like cloth. Its ink faded to brown, but still legible. This was signed in 1847, Tom explained as they sat in the hidden room surrounded by candlelight. Your great-great-grandmother, Isabella Harper, and my great-grandfather, Running Wolf. It wasn't the first agreement between our peoples, but it was the most specific. Miriam read slowly, struggling with the formal language. The document detailed an arrangement between the Harper family and the Blackfeet tribe to jointly protect a sacred site that existed between the world of flesh and the world of spirit. In exchange for this guardianship, both families would be granted protection and prosperity for 7 generations. 7 generations, she repeated. I'm the 7th daughter of the 7th daughter, and I'm the great-grandson of the great-grandson who signed this treaty, Tom said. Our families have been bound together by this agreement for over a century and a half. The wolves are part of it, but they're not ordinary wolves. What do you mean? Tom was quiet for a moment, choosing his words carefully. My grandfather told me that when the spirits needed guardians for something precious, they chose beings who could walk between worlds. The wolves you see are physical creatures, yes, but they're also spiritual beings. They can exist in both realms simultaneously, as if to emphasize his point. A low howl echoed from somewhere above them, though it seemed to come from much farther away than the yard outside. What are they protecting? Miriam asked. The treaty talks about a sacred site, but where is it? You'll understand when you're ready, Tom said. Right now, you need to learn how to communicate with them properly. The pendant helps, but it's just a tool. The real connection comes from here, he tapped his chest. From accepting your role as their partner, not their master. Over the following days, Tom taught her what her grandmother should have had years to explain. He showed her how to read the wolves' body language, how to sense their emotional states, and most importantly, how to project calm authority when they look to her for guidance. The alpha, his name is Stormwalker. He's been waiting for you since you were born, Tom explained as they watched the pack from the kitchen window. Your grandmother could work with them, but the bond was never complete. She wasn't born to it like you were. How do you know their names? Same way you'll know them once you stop fighting the connection. The gift isn't just about seeing wolves. It's about understanding the spirit world they represent. That evening, as Miriam practiced meditation techniques Tom had taught her, she felt the first real stirring of what he called the gift. It began as a tingling in her fingertips when she held the pendant, then spread up her arms like warm electricity. When she opened her eyes, the world looked different. The wolves in the yard weren't just animals anymore. They were surrounded by shimmering auras of light that pulsed with their heartbeats. She could sense their emotions as clearly as her own. Patience, protectiveness, and underneath it all, a deep well of ancient purpose. Stormwalker, the alpha, looked directly at her through the window. For the first time, she heard his voice, not spoken words, but thoughts that formed in her mind with perfect clarity. Welcome, young guardian. We have waited long for your awakening, Miriam gasped, nearly dropping the pendant. Tom, I can hear him. The alpha, he's talking to me. Tom smiled with satisfaction. Vaster than your grandmother expected. The gift grows stronger with each generation, and you're the culmination of 6 generations of careful breeding and spiritual preparation. Breeding? The word made her uncomfortable. Not in the way you're thinking, Tom assured her. The Harper women have always chosen their own partners, but they've been drawn to men who carry certain spiritual traits, sensitivity to the natural world, respect for ancient ways. Your father was such a man, though he never knew why your mother was so drawn to him. The conversation was interrupted by the sound of approaching vehicles again, but this time they were accompanied by something new, the mechanical whirring of helicopter blades. Through the window, Miriam saw not just trucks, but a helicopter circling the property at a respectful distance. They're surveying the land, Tom said grimly. Davidson's brought equipment to map the entire property. And see those men with the long-range cameras? They're documenting the wolf pack. For what? Probably to get them classified as a dangerous nuisance that needs to be relocated. Once the wolves are gone, there's nothing to stop development. Miriam felt a surge of protective anger that seemed to echo through the pack. Every wolf in the yard raised its head simultaneously, their attention focused on the circling helicopter. They can't do that, she said fiercely. This is our land. These are our wolves. Legally, they can do whatever they want if they can prove the wolves pose a threat to public safety, Tom said. And a pack this size, living this close to populated areas, most wildlife agencies would consider that problematic. Then we need to prove they're not dangerous. How do you propose to do that? Miriam looked at the pendant in her hands, feeling its warm pulse against her palm. By showing that they're not wild animals. They're guardians, just like me. They're protecting something that needs protection. She stood up, her mind made up, despite the fear coursing through her. I need to know what's really at stake here. What exactly are we guarding? Tom studied her for a long moment, then nodded slowly. Your grandmother thought you'd need more time before learning the full truth. But circumstances are forcing our hand. He moved to one of the artifact shelves and retrieved a wooden box carved with the same shifting symbols that decorated the key. This contains the real reason the covenant exists, he said solemnly. And once you see it, there will be no going back to being an ordinary child. Are you certain you're ready for that responsibility? Outside, the helicopter made another pass, lower this time. The wolves' agitation was palpable, their protective instincts warring with their need to remain hidden from human scrutiny. I stopped being an ordinary child the moment I inherited this place, Miriam said quietly. Show me what I'm really fighting for. Tom opened the box carefully, revealing something that made Miriam's breath catch in her throat. Nestled in black velvet was a sphere of what looked like crystallized starlight, translucent, constantly shifting, and emanating a warmth that had nothing to do with temperature. When she looked directly at it, she could swear she saw galaxies swirling in its depths. This is a spirit stone, Tom said reverently, one of only 7 in existence. It contains the concentrated essence of the natural world, every living thing that has ever existed on this continent. If it's destroyed or falls into the wrong hands, the spiritual balance of the entire region collapses. Miriam stared at the stone, understanding finally flooding through her. That's what we're protecting. Not just land or wolves, but the soul of everything that lives here. And that's what Davidson's employers really want, Tom confirmed. They know the stone exists, though they may not understand its true nature. To them, it's probably just an extremely valuable mineral specimen. But to us, to everything that calls this land home, it's irreplaceable. The helicopter passed overhead again, and Miriam felt the weight of 6 generations of guardians settling on her shoulders. The wolves were depending on her. The land was depending on her. And somewhere in that crystal sphere, the essence of every creature that had ever drawn breath on this continent was depending on her to keep their spiritual heritage safe. She was 12 years old, alone, except for an elderly neighbor and a pack of mystical wolves, facing forces that could destroy everything she'd inherited. But as she looked at the spirit stone, feeling its ancient power resonate with something deep in her own soul, Miriam realized she wasn't really alone at all. That night, Miriam's dreams were no longer her own. She stood in the same kitchen, but it was filled with lamplight instead of electricity, and the woman stirring herbs at the stove was her grandmother, not as the elderly recluse who died alone, but as a young woman with fierce determination in her dark eyes. "You're earlier than I expected," Margaret said without turning around. "The dream catcher usually takes weeks to activate for new guardians." Miriam looked around the dream kitchen, noting details that seemed more vivid than waking life. "This isn't real. Real is a relative concept when you're dealing with spiritual artifacts." Margaret turned, and Miriam saw that she held a dream catcher unlike any she'd seen in tourist shops. This one was woven from silver threads and adorned with crystals that pulsed with their own inner light. "This belonged to your great-great-grandmother. It stores the memories and wisdom of every guardian who came before you." "Tom found it in the hidden room," Miriam realized. "He said you left instructions for my training." "Time is shorter than we hoped," Margaret said, her dream voice carrying urgency that her journals had only hinted at. "The forces gathering against us are stronger than any previous guardian has faced. You need to understand what happened the last time the covenant was broken. The kitchen dissolved around them, replaced by the same farmland, but in a different season. Snow covered the ground, and the farmhouse looked newer, painted and well-maintained. But something was terribly wrong. The very air seemed to vibrate with malevolent energy. 1918. Margaret's voice narrated as they watched the scene unfold. "Your great-grandmother, Miriam Harper, was 18 and in love with a man from town. She wanted to abandon her responsibilities, marry, and live a normal life." Miriam watched as a young woman with her own features argued with an elderly Native American man, Tom's grandfather, she realized. The woman gestured angrily toward the house, clearly frustrated by constraints she hadn't chosen. "Elena thought the wolves could protect the spirit stone without human guidance," Margaret continued. "She was wrong." The scene shifted, showing Elena packing her belongings while the wolves howled in distress from the tree line. When she left, the spiritual barriers began to weaken immediately. The wolves could sense the danger, but without a human guardian to channel their protective energy, they couldn't maintain the covenant. What followed made Miriam's dream heart race with terror. Dark shapes began emerging from cracks in the earth. Creatures that looked like wolves, but moved wrong, their eyes empty of the intelligence and purpose that marked the true pack. Shadow wolves, hungry for the spiritual energy contained in the stone. The shadow creatures are drawn to unclaimed power, Margaret explained. They would have devoured the spirit stone and everything spiritual for hundreds of miles around. Plants would wither, animals would lose their connection to their instincts, and humans would find themselves cut off from anything that gave life meaning. The vision showed Elena returning 3 days later to find her family's farm under siege. The true wolves were fighting desperately against the shadow creatures, but they were losing ground. Many lay injured or dying, their spiritual essence being drained by their opponents. She had to choose, Margaret said quietly. Save the man she loved, or save everything else. Miriam watched as Elena took up the guardian's staff, the same carved wooden staff she'd seen in the hidden room, and began a ritual that blazed with silver light. The shadow creatures shrieked as they were banished back to whatever realm they'd emerged from. But the cost was visible on Elena's face as she aged years in minutes. The ritual required her life force, Margaret explained. She saved the covenant, but she never had children of her own. The guardian line passed to her sister, your great-grandmother. The vision faded, leaving them back in the lamplit kitchen. Every guardian since then has known the risk, Margaret said. The choice Elena faced may come again, especially if the stone is threatened by modern forces that don't understand what they're tampering with. You think Davidson's people know about the shadow creatures? I think they know enough to be dangerous without knowing enough to be careful. Margaret's expression was grim. They've been monitoring spiritual sites across the country, mapping ley lines and collecting artifacts. If they're working for who I think they are, this farm is just one target in a much larger plan. Miriam felt overwhelmed by the scope of what she was learning. What kind of plan? To harness spiritual energy for commercial purposes. Imagine being able to bottle the essence that gives ancient places their power, then sell that power to the highest bidder. Religious sites, Native American sacred grounds, places like this farm, they're all sources of energy that certain people want to exploit. The dream catcher in Margaret's hands pulsed brighter. But you have advantages Elena didn't. You're the 7th daughter of the 7th daughter. Your connection to the spiritual realm is stronger than any guardian before you. And you have allies she lacked. The wolves? More than that. Tom's people have been preparing for this confrontation for generations. They've developed ways to strengthen the covenant, to make it more resistant to breaking. But it requires trust between guardian and pack that goes deeper than any previous bond. Margaret held out the dream catcher, its silver threads gleaming. This will help you access the memories of every guardian who came before, but more importantly, it will help you communicate with the wolves' spiritual essence. Not just their thoughts, but their deepest knowledge of the natural world. As Miriam reached for the dream catcher, she felt the dream beginning to fade. Wait, I have so many more questions. The answers are all here, Margaret said, gesturing to the dream catcher. But remember, knowledge without wisdom is dangerous. Don't try to learn everything at once. Let understanding come gradually as you're ready for it. Miriam woke to find the real dream catcher lying on her nightstand, though she was certain it hadn't been there when she went to sleep. Outside her window, the wolves were more active than usual, pacing restlessly as if sensing something approaching. She held the dream catcher up to the morning light, watching the crystals throw rainbow patterns across the ceiling. When she touched one of the silver threads, she felt a brief flash of connection, not to her grandmother this time, but to Stormwalker. The Alpha. His thoughts came through clearly. Danger approaches with the rising sun. The men return with weapons and machines. Are you ready to stand with us, young guardian? Miriam dressed quickly and went downstairs to find Tom already in the kitchen, his expression troubled. They're coming back, he said without preamble. Multiple vehicles. And this time they've brought what looks like animal control officers. Through the window, Miriam could see the approaching convoy, not just Davidson's black sedan and Philip's truck, but official-looking vehicles with government plates and specialized equipment that suggested they were serious about removing the wolves. How long do we have? She asked. Maybe an hour before they reach the property line. Miriam felt the dream catcher warm in her hands, and suddenly she knew what needed to be done. Then it's time for me to stop being a student and start being a guardian. She looked out at the wolves, gathering in defensive positions around the house, their spiritual energy visible to her now as shimmering auras of silver and gold. They were ready to fight for their home, but they needed her to guide them. The question was whether she was ready to accept the full weight of what that guidance might cost her. Mrs. Holloway arrived just as the official convoy crested the hill leading to the farm. Her timing was either incredibly fortunate or carefully planned. Miriam suspected the latter when she saw Tom nod to the social worker with familiar recognition. "I thought you might need some adult support today," Mrs. Holloway said as she climbed out of her sedan, but her eyes were focused on the approaching vehicles with their animal control markings. "Mr. Clearwater called me this morning with some concerns about harassment. They want to take the wolves," Miriam said, grateful to have another ally, but uncertain how much Mrs. Holloway actually understood about the situation. "So, I've been told." Mrs. Holloway's voice was carefully neutral, but there was steel underneath the social worker's professional calm. "I've also been told that you've been caring for yourself quite well out here, contrary to certain people's concerns about your welfare." Davidson's sedan pulled up first, followed by 2 animal control trucks and a vehicle marked with Federal Wildlife Management insignia. The convoy stopped well short of the house. Apparently having learned respect for the wolves' protective perimeter during their previous visits, Davidson emerged from his car, looking frustrated and determined in equal measure. With him was Phillips, 2 men in animal control uniforms, and a woman in a Federal Ranger's uniform who carried herself with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Miss Harper," Davidson called out, staying safely behind the wolf line. "We need to discuss the dangerous situation you've created here. These animals pose a significant threat to public safety." "What animals?" Mrs. Holloway asked with perfect innocence, looking around the yard where no wolves were currently visible. Tom had taught Miriam that the pack could fade into the landscape when they chose, becoming nearly invisible even in broad daylight. Davidson pointed toward the tree line. "There's a pack of wolves living on this property. Hundreds of them. We have photographic evidence." "I see trees and grass," Mrs. Holloway said mildly. "Perhaps you could share this photographic evidence." Phillips produced a tablet and swiped through several photos that clearly showed the wolf pack in defensive positions around the house. But as Miriam watched, the images began to shift subtly, the wolves fading until they looked like shadows, then like tricks of light and vegetation. "That's impossible," Phillips muttered, staring at his screen. "These photos were crystal clear yesterday." Tom stepped forward with a slight smile. "Technology can be unreliable out here. The mineral deposits in the soil sometimes interfere with electronic equipment." The Federal Ranger, who had been listening to this exchange with growing skepticism, decided to take charge. "I'm Special Agent Sarah Chen with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. We've received reports of an unusually large wolf pack in this area, which would be a significant ecological concern. I need to conduct a proper survey of the property. Do you have a warrant?" Mrs. Holloway asked pleasantly. "I don't need a warrant for a wildlife survey on private property when public safety is potentially at risk." "Actually, you do," Mrs. Holloway corrected, pulling out her own tablet. "I took the liberty of researching federal wildlife law last night. You need either a warrant, permission from the property owner, or evidence of immediate danger to human life. Do you have any of those things?" Agent Chen's jaw tightened. "The reports suggest a pack of unprecedented size." "Reports from whom?" Miriam found her voice, stepping forward with the confidence that came from holding the dream catcher. She could feel the wolves' presence, even though she couldn't see them, their spiritual energy forming a protective barrier around the property. "Who exactly reported seeing wolves here?" Davidson and Phillips exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Local residents," Davidson said vaguely. "The nearest neighbors are the Clearwater family," Mrs. Holloway noted, gesturing toward Tom. "Mr. Clearwater, have you seen any dangerous wolves on this property?" Not a one, Tom said solemnly. Miss Harper keeps a very peaceful farm. While this verbal sparring continued, Miriam felt the dream catcher growing warm in her pocket. She touched it gently and immediately sensed what the wolves were trying to tell her. These weren't just bureaucrats. Concerned about wildlife management, at least two of the people in the convoy were carrying equipment designed to detect spiritual energy. The revelation hit her like a physical blow. They weren't here to relocate the wolves. They were here to find the Spirit Stone. Agent Chen, Miriam said, interrupting a heated exchange between the federal agent and Mrs. Holloway. What exactly are you looking for? Because if it's just wolves, I can assure you there aren't any dangerous animals on this property. We're looking for an ecological anomaly, Chen replied carefully. Satellite imagery suggests unusual animal behavior patterns centered on this location. What kind of unusual behavior? Chen hesitated, clearly debating how much to reveal. Large-scale migration patterns that don't correspond to known seasonal movements. Animals from across the region appearing to gather at this location, then dispersing without apparent cause. Tom and Miriam exchanged glances. The spiritual energy of the Spirit Stone did attract wildlife. Not just wolves, but all kinds of animals drawn to the land's concentrated natural power. To someone monitoring from satellites, it would look like mysterious animal behavior rather than spiritual pilgrimage. Perhaps they're attracted to the natural beauty of the area, Mrs. Holloway suggested. It is remarkably peaceful here. Peaceful enough that a 12-year-old girl can live safely on her own, Tom added pointedly. Agent Chen studied Miriam with sharp eyes. You're really living here alone? That seems unusual for someone your age. I'm not alone, Miriam said, and as she spoke, she felt the wolves responding to her confidence. They didn't become visible, but their presence became tangible, a sense of watchful protection that seemed to emanate from the land itself. I have everything I need here, including proper schooling, Chen pressed, medical care, adult supervision, all arranged through appropriate channels, Mrs. Holloway interjected smoothly. Miss Harper's situation is entirely legal and well monitored. I visit regularly to ensure her welfare. Davidson was growing visibly frustrated with the bureaucratic roadblocks. This is ridiculous. We know there are wolves here. We have investors ready to develop this land, but we can't proceed with dangerous animals roaming free. Then perhaps your investors should look elsewhere, Mrs. Holloway suggested. Private property rights are still protected in this country, regardless of what investors might prefer. As the argument continued, Miriam felt the dreamcatcher pulse with urgent warning. Through her enhanced senses, she detected something the others couldn't see. Additional vehicles approaching from the east, moving fast and without the official markings of the convoy already present. Tom, she said quietly, we have more company coming. Tom's expression darkened as he followed her gaze toward the eastern horizon. Not official vehicles. Private security from the look of them. Mrs. Holloway caught the exchange. Agent Chen, did you bring additional personnel? No, Chen said, turning to look where they were pointing. Those aren't our vehicles. The approaching SUVs had no government markings at all, just black paint and tinted windows that suggested military or corporate security. They moved with purpose across the rough terrain, clearly equipped for off-road pursuit. I think, Mrs. Holloway said with careful understatement, we may need to continue this discussion at a later time. Miss Harper, perhaps you should go inside. But Miriam felt the wolves stirring with protective anger, their spiritual energy building like an approaching storm. These new arrivals weren't here for bureaucratic negotiations. They were here for something much more direct and dangerous. The dreamcatcher was burning hot in her pocket now, and through it she could hear Stormwalker's urgent mental voice. The Shadow Seekers come. They hunger for the stone's power. Stand ready, young guardian. The real battle begins now. The approaching vehicles weren't the most shocking revelation of the morning. That honor belonged to Agent Chen herself, who suddenly produced a device that looked like a cross between a metal detector and a satellite phone. Its screen displaying readings that made her eyes widen with unmistakable hunger. Energy signature confirmed, she said into a concealed microphone. The artifact is definitely here. Mrs. Holloway's pleasant social worker demeanor evaporated instantly. Agent Chen, I think there's been a misunderstanding about your authority here. There's no misunderstanding, Chen replied, her Federal Ranger persona dropping like a discarded mask. My real employer has been tracking spiritual artifacts for 3 years. This property contains one of the most powerful energy sources we've ever detected. Davidson looked genuinely confused. What are you talking about? We're here about mineral rights and wolf management. You're here because you were useful, Chen said dismissively. Your harassment gave us the perfect cover to conduct official surveillance. But now that we've confirmed the artifact's location, we don't need legal pretenses anymore. Tom stepped protectively closer to Miriam, his weathered hands moving to something concealed beneath his jacket. What kind of artifact? Chen's smile was cold and professional, the kind that could revolutionize humanity's relationship with natural energy. Imagine being able to harness the concentrated spiritual essence of an entire ecosystem. Power plants that run on pure life force. Batteries that never die because they're fed by the earth itself. You're talking about the spirit stone, Miriam said, her voice steadier than she felt. You know about it? Chen's interest sharpened. Excellent. That will save time. Where is it hidden? Even if I knew, I wouldn't tell you. Oh, but you will. Chen gestured toward the approaching black SUVs, which were now close enough that Miriam could see armed figures emerging from them. Because if you don't, my colleagues will tear this property apart looking for it. And I suspect your wolf friends won't survive that kind of search. The wolves in question were no longer hiding. As if responding to the direct threat, they began emerging from concealment all around the property. Dozens, then hundreds, materializing from grass and shadows with the fluid grace of creatures that existed partially outside normal reality. Agent. Chen's confidence wavered slightly as she found herself surrounded by the largest wolf pack anyone present had ever seen. Remarkable. The energy readings make sense now. These aren't ordinary animals. No, Tom said grimly. They're not. Even better. Imagine what we could learn from studying them. How they channel spiritual energy. How they've adapted to exist in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The scientific applications alone. She was interrupted by the arrival of the black SUVs, which disgorged a team of heavily armed operatives dressed in tactical gear. Their leader, a sharp-faced woman with military bearing, approached with weapons ready but not yet aimed. Perimeter secured, Dr. Chen, the operative reported. No signs of local law enforcement response. Dr. Chen, Mrs. Holloway repeated. Not Agent Chen? Dr. Sarah Chen, Director of Paranormal Acquisitions for Blackwood Industries, Chen corrected. We're a private research firm, specializing in the commercialization of supernatural phenomena. Davidson was backing toward his sedan, clearly realizing he'd been manipulated into something far beyond property development. This is insane. I want no part of whatever this is. Too late for that, Chen said pleasantly. You've already served your purpose. Though I suppose we could arrange a generous finder's fee if you'd prefer to cooperate rather than complicate things. The wolves had formed defensive rings around the house, their spiritual energy so intense that the air itself seemed to shimmer. Stormwalker, the Alpha, stepped forward with regal dignity, his massive form radiating protective power that made even the armed operatives hesitate. Magnificent, Chen breathed, raising her detection device toward the Alpha. The readings spiked so high they went off the scale. The energy density in that creature is incredible. We'll need specialized containment for the live specimens. Live specimens. Miriam felt rage building in her chest, a fury that seemed to resonate through every wolf on the property, for research purposes, naturally. Understanding how they channel spiritual energy could unlock technologies worth billions. Clean energy, enhanced agriculture, medical applications, the possibilities are limitless. Tom's hand emerged from his jacket, holding something that looked like a carved bone flute. You have no idea what you're dealing with. On the contrary, Chen said. We've been studying sites like this for years. Ancient power sources, poorly guarded by people who don't understand their true potential. Your family has been sitting on a fortune, Mr. Clearwater, just because your ancestors were too primitive to recognize scientific opportunity. Our ancestors, Tom said quietly, were wise enough to know that some things shouldn't be commercialized. He raised the flute to his lips and played a single, haunting note that seemed to echo from the earth itself. The effect was immediate and dramatic. Every wolf on the property howled in unison, their voices creating a harmony that made the air vibrate with spiritual energy. The armed operatives stumbled, clutching their heads as the sound seemed to penetrate directly into their minds. Chen's detection equipment overloaded and sparked, its screen cracking from the energy surge. But it was what happened next that truly revealed the magnitude of what Chen was trying to steal. The ground beneath their feet began to pulse with visible light. Veins of golden energy spreading outward from beneath the farmhouse like a vast network of spiritual circuitry. The wolves' howling intensified, and Miriam realized they weren't just making noise. They were calling something. The air above the farm shimmered, and suddenly the property was no longer empty grassland. Overlaying the physical landscape like a double exposure was another realm. A spiritual dimension where the farmhouse sat at the center of a vast mandala of light, with pathways of energy stretching to the horizon in every direction. Impossible, Chen whispered, staring at readings that defied her instrument's capacity to measure. The energy source isn't just localized, it's connected to a continental network. Tom lowered his flute, his expression grim. Now you begin to understand. The Spirit Stone isn't just a battery you can steal and exploit. It's a node in a spiritual grid that maintains the natural balance across thousands of miles. Remove it and the entire network collapses. What kind of collapse? Mrs. Holloway asked, though her tone suggested she already suspected the answer wouldn't be pleasant. Ecological disaster on a scale humanity has never seen, Tom replied. Every sacred site, every natural sanctuary, every place where spiritual energy maintains the connection between the physical and metaphysical worlds. All of it would wither and die. Chen's operatives were struggling to maintain their positions as waves of spiritual energy washed over them. Several had dropped their weapons, overwhelmed by sensations their minds couldn't process. You're exaggerating, Chen said, but her voice lacked its earlier confidence. One small energy source couldn't possibly affect such a large area. Tell her about the prophecy. Stormwalker's mental voice reached Miriam through the dreamcatcher. Tell her what happens when the seventh guardian fails. Miriam found the carved wooden staff in her hands, though she didn't remember retrieving it from the hidden room. It thrummed with power that felt both ancient and alive, responding to her touch with eager warmth. There's a prophecy, she said, her voice carrying across the property with unnatural clarity, about the seventh daughter of the seventh daughter. And what happens if she fails to protect the covenant? More primitive superstition, Chen scoffed, but her eyes remained fixed on the staff's glowing surface. The blood moon rises in 3 days, Miriam continued, information flowing into her mind from the dreamcatcher and the staff simultaneously. During that time, the spiritual barriers are at their weakest. If the covenant is broken, then, if the spirit stone is removed or destroyed, the shadow creatures will be able to enter our world permanently. Shadow creatures? The things that feed on spiritual energy, Tom explained. Think of them as the opposite of these wolves, beings that drain life instead of protecting it. They exist in the spaces between worlds, always hungry, always searching for cracks in reality they can exploit. Chen's detection equipment, despite its damage, was still providing readings that seemed to support Tom's claims. The energy patterns, she murmured, studying the crackling display. They're not random. There's a structure here, like a containment system. The wolves aren't just guardians of the stone, Miriam realized, understanding flooding through her as she held the staff. They're guardians of the barriers that keep the shadow creatures locked away. And the blood moon weakens those barriers whether we're ready or not. The spiritual overlay was fading now, but its brief appearance had shown everyone present the true scope of what was at stake. This wasn't just about one farm or one artifact. It was about the spiritual infrastructure that kept darkness from overwhelming light across an entire continent. Chen's operatives were regrouping, but their earlier confidence was gone. They'd signed up to steal an artifact, not to potentially trigger an apocalyptic scenario. Dr. Chen, their leader said carefully, perhaps we should reconsider our approach. Here, but Chen's scientific curiosity had been fully awakened. No, she said firmly, this is even more valuable than we thought. If we can study the containment system, understand how it works, we could harness that power as well. Control over both light and shadow, imagine what that would be worth. The wolves' protective energy intensified, and Miriam felt their message clearly. The talking was over. One way or another, the next 3 days would determine whether the Covenant survived its greatest test, and whether a 12-year-old girl was strong enough to stand against forces that threatened to devour the soul of the natural world. The standoff might have continued indefinitely, if not for Mrs. Holloway's unexpected intervention. While Chen argued with her operatives, and Tom tried to explain the spiritual implications of their actions, the social worker quietly activated her cell phone and made a call that changed everything. Sheriff Martinez, this is Ellen Holloway. I need immediate assistance at the Harper farm on Route 47. We have armed trespassers threatening a minor in my custody. Chen spun around, her face flushing with anger. You can't call local law enforcement. This is a federal operation. Show me your federal warrant, Mrs. Holloway replied calmly. Show me any legal documentation that gives you authority to threaten a child on private property. We don't need then you're trespassing. Mrs. Holloway's voice carried the authority of someone who'd spent decades navigating bureaucratic battles. Sheriff Martinez has a 20-minute response time. I suggest you decide quickly whether you want to explain your weapons and your threats to local law enforcement. The tactical team leader was already signaling her operatives to prepare for withdrawal. Dr. Chen, we signed on for artifact retrieval, not a firefight with county sheriff's deputies. The artifact is right here, Chen protested, gesturing wildly toward the farmhouse. We can't just walk away. We can and we will, the team leader said firmly. My contract doesn't cover engaging law enforcement, especially not with this many civilians present. As the operatives began loading back into their vehicles, Chen made one last desperate attempt to salvage her mission. Miss Harper, you don't understand what you're protecting. The stone could provide clean energy for millions of people, medical breakthroughs that could save countless lives. How can you be so selfish? Because I understand what you don't, Miriam replied, the staff's power lending strength to her words. Some things are more important than human convenience. The balance you'd destroy took thousands of years to establish. Once it's broken, it can't be fixed. Chen's parting shot was delivered with venomous precision. Fine, keep your primitive mysticism, but we know where the stone is now, and we know exactly when your defenses will be weakest. 3 days until the blood moon, you said. We'll be back. The convoy departed, leaving behind only tire tracks and the lingering scent of fear. But their withdrawal brought little relief. Everyone present understood that Chen's threat wasn't idle. They would return with better planning, heavier equipment, and official authorization that wouldn't be so easily challenged. How long before the sheriff arrives? Tom asked. About 15 minutes, Mrs. Holloway replied. But I should probably prepare him for what he might find here. Bill Martinez has been sheriff for 20 years, but I doubt he's dealt with anything quite like this. Can we trust him? Miriam asked. Mrs. Holloway and Tom exchanged a look that suggested they'd discussed this possibility before. Sheriff Martinez's grandmother was Blackfeet, Tom said carefully. His family has old connections to these lands. He may be more understanding than most outsiders. We'll need all the understanding we can get, Miriam said, feeling the weight of the approaching blood moon like a pressure in her bones. Tom, what exactly do I need to do to renew the covenant? Your stories about Elena suggest it's more than just a ceremony. Tom's expression grew somber. It requires 3 things: the willing participation of the Guardian, the consent of the wolf pack, and a ritual fire that burns throughout the blood moon. But Miriam, you need to understand, once you perform the renewal ceremony, you're bound to this land for life. You'll never be able to leave for more than a few days without weakening the covenant. What about school? College? Having a normal life? Your education can be arranged through correspondence and tutoring, Mrs. Holloway said gently. As for a normal life, that ended the moment you inherited this responsibility. But that doesn't mean your life can't be fulfilling. Your grandmother found great purpose in her guardianship. She also died alone, Miriam pointed out. She chose solitude, Tom corrected. Guardian families often live on the land together. The isolation was Margaret's preference, not a requirement of the covenant. Before Miriam could ask more questions, the sound of approaching sirens announced Sheriff Martinez's arrival. She watched nervously as a patrol car and an unmarked SUV pulled into the yard. Wondering how to explain supernatural wolves and spirit stones to a law enforcement officer, Sheriff Martinez proved to be a tall, lean man in his 50s with graying hair and kind eyes that seemed to take in everything at once. He approached the group with the careful confidence of someone accustomed to diffusing tense situations. "Ellen," he greeted Mrs. Holloway with familiar warmth. "Tom?" His nod to the elderly Native American carried deeper respect. "And you must be Miriam Harper. I knew your grandmother. Good woman, kept to herself but never caused trouble." "Sheriff," Mrs. Holloway began, "we've had some unusual visitors today. Armed individuals making threats about removing Miss Harper from her property." Martinez's expression hardened. "What kind of threats?" "They claim to be federal agents conducting a wildlife survey," Tom explained. "But they were actually corporate operatives looking for something they believed was hidden on the property." "What kind of something?" Miriam held up the staff, which was still glowing faintly with residual power. "It's complicated, Sheriff. My family has been guardians of this land for generations. There are things here that certain people want to exploit." Martinez studied the staff with interest rather than skepticism. "Things like what?" "Sacred sites," Tom said carefully. "Places where the natural world maintains its spiritual balance. My people have known about them for centuries, and these corporate types want to what? Strip mine them?" "Among other things," Mrs. Holloway said. "They mentioned research applications, energy extraction, commercial exploitation of what they called supernatural phenomena." Martinez was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces around him. "My grandmother used to tell stories about places like this. Locations where the spirits gathered to keep the world in balance. I always thought they were just stories." "They're not," Miriam said simply. As if summoned by her words, Stormwalker emerged from the tree line, moving with the unhurried dignity of a creature that had nothing to fear from human authority. The alpha wolf approached to within 20 feet of the group and sat, regarding Sheriff Martinez with intelligent yellow eyes. Martinez stared at the massive wolf for several heartbeats, then slowly nodded. "That's not a normal wolf." "No," Tom agreed. "He's not." "How many more are there?" "About 200, Miriam said. "They've been living here for generations, protecting something that can't be replaced. And these corporate people want to take that something. They want to turn it into a weapon," Tom said bluntly. "Use its power for profit without understanding the consequences." Martinez removed his hat and ran his fingers through his graying hair. "This is way above my pay grade. But I can tell you this. I've dealt with corporate security teams before, and they don't give up easily. If they've identified this place as valuable, they'll keep coming back until they get what they want." "We know," Miriam said. "The question is how to stop them. Legally, your best bet is to get the property protected somehow. Historic preservation, endangered species habitat, something that would make development impossible." "What about spiritually?" Mrs. Holloway asked, surprising everyone with the question. Martinez looked at her for a moment, then at Tom, finally settling his gaze on Miriam. "My grandmother always said that some fights have to be won in the old ways, not the new ones. If you're asking me whether I believe in sacred sites and spiritual guardians, yes, I do. And if you're asking whether I'll help protect them from people who would destroy them for profit, yes, I will." Relief flooded through Miriam so strongly that the wolves felt it too, their ears pricking forward as one. "Thank you, Sheriff. Don't thank me yet. I can provide some legal protection, maybe delay any official action they try to take." But if they come back with federal warrants or military support, there's only so much local law enforcement can do. The blood moon is in 3 days, Miriam said. If we can protect the site until then, I can renew the covenant and strengthen the defenses. What happens if you can't? Tom and Miriam exchanged glances. Things that have been held back for centuries will be set free, Tom said quietly. Shadow creatures that feed on spiritual energy. They'll spread across the continent, draining the life force from every sacred site, every natural sanctuary, every place where the spiritual world touches the physical world. Martinez absorbed this information with the stoic calm of someone who'd seen enough of the world to know that stranger things were possible. Okay, 3 days. What do you need from me? Patrols around, Doug? The property perimeter, Mrs. Holloway suggested. Documentation of any trespassing attempts. And maybe some discretion about what you've seen here today. I can do all of that. Martinez looked directly at Miriam. But I need to ask, are you certain you want this responsibility? You're just a child. No one would blame you for walking away and letting someone else deal with this. Miriam felt the staff pulse with warmth in her hands, felt the wolves' patient trust flowing through the dreamcatcher, felt the weight of 6 generations of guardians who had made the same choice she was being asked to make. I'm not just a child anymore, she said quietly. I'm the 7th guardian, and I won't let the shadow creatures destroy everything my family has protected. Stormwalker howled once, a sound of approval and acceptance that echoed across the grassland. The other wolves joined in, their voices creating a harmony that seemed to strengthen the very air around them. In 3 days, the blood moon would rise, and Miriam Harper, 12-year-old guardian of forces beyond most people's imagination, would either save the spiritual balance of an entire continent or die trying. The wolves were ready. The question was whether she was ready to become everything they needed her to be. The blood moon rose like a crimson eye opening in the darkness, casting everything in shades of amber and shadow. Miriam stood in the sacred grove behind the farmhouse, wearing the ceremonial wolf mask that had belonged to every guardian before her. Through its carved eye holes, she could see the spiritual realm overlaying the physical world, veins of golden energy pulsing through the earth, connecting every living thing in an intricate web of power. The ritual fire blazed in the ancient stone bowl at the center of the grove, its flames dancing higher than any ordinary fire should burn. Tom had spent the afternoon teaching her the words she needed to speak, the gestures that would channel her will through the staff and into the covenant itself. Remember, he'd said, the renewal isn't just about maintaining the barriers. It's about accepting your role as the bridge between human understanding and spiritual truth. The wolves can't do this alone. They need a human guardian who can see both worlds and choose to protect them both. Now, as the blood moon reached its zenith, Miriam felt the full weight of that responsibility settling on her shoulders. Around the grove, the entire wolf pack had gathered in concentric circles, their spiritual energy so intense that the air itself shimmered with power. Stormwalker sat directly across from her, his massive form silhouetted against the moon's crimson light. The ceremony should have begun at moonrise, but they were interrupted by the distant rumble of heavy machinery approaching across the grassland. Chen's corporate operatives had returned, just as she'd promised. But this time, they'd brought equipment that suggested they intended to dig up the entire property if necessary. Bulldozers, Tom said grimly, watching the convoy of construction vehicles approach with military precision. And those looked like drilling rigs. They're going to try to excavate the entire grove. Through the dreamcatcher, Miriam felt the wolves' growing agitation. The pack was ready to defend their sacred ground, but against heavy machinery and armed operators, even their supernatural abilities had limits. How long will the ceremony take? She asked, trying to keep panic out of her voice. At least an hour for the full renewal, Tom replied. And it can't be interrupted. If the ritual fire goes out, or the words are broken, we'll have to wait until the next blood moon, which is when? 14 months from now. The shadow creatures will have broken through long before then. The approaching convoy was close enough now that Miriam could see individual vehicles, not just bulldozers and drilling equipment, but mobile command units and what looked suspiciously like military transport trucks. Chen hadn't just returned with better equipment. She'd brought an army. They can't reach the grove directly, Tom said, studying the terrain between the approaching forces and their position. The sacred circle extends about 50 yards in every direction. Machinery will malfunction if they try to bring it too close. What about on foot? The wolves will stop anyone who tries to approach during the ceremony. But Miriam, you need to understand, once you begin the renewal ritual, you can't stop to help defend the grove. The covenant requires your complete attention, or it will fail. Miriam felt the weight of impossible choices pressing down on her. Begin the ceremony and trust the wolves to hold off an armed assault, or abandon the ritual to help fight, and risk losing everything when the shadow creatures broke through. The decision was taken out of her hands when the first bulldozer's engine died, 50 yards from the grove's edge, then the second and the third, until the entire convoy sat silent in the blood moon's crimson light. The sacred circle is stronger tonight. Stormwalker's mental voice reached her through the dreamcatcher. The blood moon amplifies all spiritual energy, including our defenses. But they will not give up easily. As if to prove his point, armed figures began emerging from the disabled vehicles, carrying equipment that looked designed to function where normal technology failed. Chen herself was among them, wearing gear that seemed to shimmer with its own inner light, spiritual dampening technology. Miriam realized, designed to suppress supernatural influences. Begin the ceremony, Tom urged. The wolves can hold them off long enough for you to complete the renewal. Miriam raised the guardian's staff, feeling its power respond to her touch as the blood moon's light struck its carved surface. The sacred fire blazed higher, its flames reaching toward the crimson moon like fingers of living light. Ancient spirits of this land, she began, her voice carrying across the grove with supernatural clarity. I stand before you as the seventh daughter of the seventh daughter, heir to the covenant that binds guardian to guardian, human to wolf, light to shadow. The wolves began to howl in harmony, their voices creating a complex melody that seemed to strengthen the very fabric of reality around the grove. But even as she spoke the ritual words, Miriam could see Chen's forces advancing on foot, their spiritual dampening equipment creating zones of dead air where the sacred circle's protection faltered. The battle for the Covenant's survival had begun, and Miriam could only pray that her words would prove stronger than their weapons. The spiritual dampening technology created islands of silence in the wolves' song, dead zones where Chen's operatives could advance without triggering the grove's natural defenses. But for every step they gained, Stormwalker and his pack adapted, flowing like liquid shadow around the dampened areas and striking from directions the intruders couldn't predict. Miriam forced herself to focus on the ceremony, even as the sounds of battle reached her ears. The ritual words came from deep memory now, phrases in the ancient language that seemed to speak themselves through her voice. By fire and moonlight, by blood and spirit, I accept the burden that cannot be shared. I become the bridge between worlds, the guardian of balance, the keeper of promises made before my birth. The sacred fire responded to her words, its flames shifting from orange to silver to gold, each color representing a different aspect of the Covenant's power. As she spoke, Miriam felt something profound happening within her, not just acceptance of responsibility, but transformation into something more than purely human. Through the dreamcatcher, she could sense every wolf in the pack, their individual spirits becoming part of her own awareness. She felt Stormwalker's fierce determination as he led the defense of the grove's eastern approach. She felt the pack's younger wolves, swift and cunning, harassing Chen's forces with hit-and-run tactics that left the operatives confused and disoriented. But she also felt their growing exhaustion. The spiritual dampening equipment was taking its toll, creating dead zones that drained the wolves' supernatural abilities and forced them to fight as ordinary animals against technologically superior opponents. The heart of the covenant lies not in dominion but in partnership, Miriam continued, raising the staff toward the blood moon. Guardian and pack, human wisdom and wild spirit, bound together in service to something greater than either could protect alone. It was then that Stormwalker approached the sacred fire, his massive form glowing with silver light in the blood moon's radiance. Without warning, he pressed his muzzle against his own chest and withdrew. Something that made Miriam's breath catch, a crystalline object that pulsed with the rhythm of his heartbeat, the heartstone of the pack, his spiritual core, the essence of what made him more than an ordinary wolf. Offering it to her was an act of ultimate trust, a gesture that would bind their lives together in ways she was only beginning to understand. If you accept this gift, his mental voice reached her, we become one spirit in two forms. My strength becomes yours, your wisdom becomes mine. But the bond cannot be broken. If one dies, both die. Miriam looked at the Heartstone, then at the battle raging around the grove's perimeter. Chen's forces were gaining ground despite the wolves' desperate defense. The spiritual dampening technology was creating an expanding zone of dead spiritual energy. And soon they would reach the sacred fire itself. She took the Heartstone in her free hand, feeling its warmth merge with her own heartbeat. The transformation was immediate and overwhelming. Suddenly she could see through every wolf's eyes simultaneously, could feel their strength flowing into her own body, could sense the spiritual currents that connected every living thing in the grove. I accept this bond, she said, her voice now carrying harmonics that seemed to come from the wolves themselves. Let Guardian and Pack become one protector, one will, one purpose. The moment the Heartstone touched the sacred fire, everything changed. The blood moon's light intensified, bathing the entire grove in crimson radiance that made the spiritual realm visible to everyone present, including Chen's operatives. The wolves' defensive positions became sources of blazing silver light, and the sacred fire erupted into a pillar of golden flame that reached toward the moon itself. Chen's spiritual dampening equipment overloaded and died, sparking and smoking as the renewed Covenant's power overwhelmed their technological attempts at suppression. The operatives found themselves trapped in a grove, where reality itself had become fluid, where the very ground pulsed with life force that resisted their presence. Impossible, Chen breathed, staring at readings that showed energy levels beyond her instrument's capacity to measure. The power output is off the charts. This isn't just an artifact, it's a living system that will defend itself, Miriam said, her voice carrying across the grove with supernatural clarity. Through her bond with the pack, she could feel the shadow creatures pressing against the barriers between worlds, hungry for the chaos that Chen's interference might create, but the renewed Covenant held them back, its power strengthened by the willing sacrifice of both Guardian and Pack. The spiritual barriers not only held but grew stronger, creating a zone of protection that extended far beyond the grove itself. Chen's forces found themselves pushed back by waves of pure life energy, their weapons useless against defenses that existed on a spiritual rather than physical level. One by one, they retreated toward their disabled vehicles, leaving Chen standing alone at the grove's edge. "This isn't over," she called out desperately. "There are other sites, other artifacts. You can't protect them all." "I don't have to," Miriam replied, feeling the network of spiritual connections that linked sacred sites across the continent. "The Covenant protects more than just this grove. By renewing it here, I've strengthened every sacred site within 1,000 miles. The blood moon reached its peak, and the ceremony concluded with a final burst of golden light that seemed to set the very air on fire. When the radiance faded, Chen and her forces were gone, their technology useless, and their mission failed. Miriam stood in the sacred grove, no longer just a 12-year-old girl with a canvas satchel, but a true guardian bonded to the wild spirits of the land. The Covenant was renewed, the shadow creatures contained, and the balance preserved for another generation. But most importantly, she was no longer alone. 3 months after the blood moon ceremony, Miriam Harper woke to sunlight streaming through her bedroom window and the familiar sound of wolves calling to each other across the grassland. But now their voices carried meaning she could understand as clearly as human speech. Discussions about weather patterns, reports on the health of various pack members, and updates on the spiritual energy flowing through the land. The transformation hadn't been immediate. In the days following the covenant renewal, she'd experienced what Tom called settling, a gradual integration of her human consciousness with the pack's collective awareness. There had been moments of disorientation when she'd found herself thinking with wolf instincts, and times when the wolves had exhibited distinctly human, problem-solving approaches. But the adjustment period was over now, and the bond felt as natural as breathing. She dressed and went downstairs to find Mrs. Holloway already in the kitchen, grading papers at the table that had become Miriam's classroom. The social worker had proven remarkably adaptable to the unusual circumstances of Miriam's guardianship, arranging for correspondence courses that could accommodate a schedule built around spiritual responsibilities. "Good morning." "Dear," Mrs. Holloway said without looking up from her grading, "your mathematics assignment was excellent, but your history essay needs more work. You can't just write, 'I asked my grandmother's spirit through the dream catcher' as a source citation." "But that's what I did," Miriam protested, pouring herself a cup of tea from the pot that always seemed to be ready when she needed it. "One of the minor conveniences of living in a house where the spiritual realm responded to its inhabitants' needs. I understand that, but your correspondence teachers don't. You'll need to find conventional sources that support the information you received through supernatural means." Miriam sighed, but nodded. Learning to translate between spiritual knowledge and academic requirements had proven to be one of the more challenging aspects of her education. It was easier to learn history from the dreamcatcher's stored memories than from textbooks, but explaining that to teachers posed obvious difficulties. Tom arrived as she was finishing breakfast, carrying a leather satchel that had replaced her old canvas bag as a symbol of her journey. This one was decorated with wolf imagery and filled with items that would have seemed impossible 3 months ago. Crystals that stored spiritual energy, herbs that grew only in places where the veil between worlds was thin, and letters from other guardians around the world who had felt the Covenant's renewal and wanted to offer their support. "The Wilson family sends their regards," Tom said, pulling a letter from the satchel. "Their sacred grove in Oregon experienced a significant strengthening after your ceremony. They're hoping to arrange a meeting when travel becomes feasible." "How many other sites are there?" Miriam asked. She'd learned that the Covenant network extended far beyond her grandmother's farm, but the full scope was still revealing itself gradually. "Dozens of major sites, hundreds of minor ones," Tom replied. "Your renewal here sent ripples through the entire network. Every guardian in North America felt the power surge." Mrs. Holloway looked up from her papers with interest. "Are they all like Miriam? Young people thrust into responsibilities they didn't choose?" "Some are," Tom said. "Others are multi-generational families where the traditions never lapsed. A few are institutions, monasteries, tribal councils, universities that have been maintaining sacred sites for centuries without most people realizing their true purpose." "And they all know about each other?" "Now they do," Tom smiled. "Before the renewal, communication between sites was limited, but Miriam's bond with the pack created a spiritual network that allows guardians to share information directly. It's the strongest connection we've had in over a century." As if summoned by the discussion, Stormwalker appeared at the kitchen window, his massive form silhouetted against the morning light. Through their bond, Miriam felt his request for her attention. Not urgent, but important. "Excuse me," she said, stepping outside to join the alpha wolf in the yard. Stormwalker's mental voice was warm with affection and pride. "The Pack Council has made a decision, young guardian. We wish to show you something that has been hidden even from previous guardians." He led her beyond the sacred grove to a section of the property she'd never fully explored. "See, depression in the land where the grass grew differently, and the air shimmered with persistent heat waves. Despite the cool morning temperature, "What is this place?" she asked. "The Heart of Hearts," Stormwalker replied, "where the first spirit stone was born, before it was carved into the 7 stones that protect the major sites. Your bond with the pack has grown strong enough that the land itself wishes to reveal its deepest secret." The ground beneath her feet began to glow with soft golden light, and suddenly Miriam could see the true scope of what she protected. Not just one stone, but a living crystal formation that extended deep into the Earth's core, its roots touching every continent, and its branches reaching into the spiritual realm itself. "This is why the covenant matters," Stormwalker explained. "This is the source of all spiritual energy in the physical world. Damage it, and every sacred site on Earth begins to die. Destroy it, and the barrier between light and shadow collapses permanently." Miriam stared at the revelation, understanding finally why her family had been chosen as guardians, not just of one farm or one stone, but of the very wellspring that kept spiritual darkness from overwhelming the world. "I had no idea," she whispered. "Previous guardians weren't ready for this knowledge," Stormwalker said gently. "But you are different." The 7th daughter of the 7th daughter, bonded to the pack in ways that transcend individual consciousness. "You are the first guardian who can truly protect the Heart of Hearts, because you are no longer entirely human." "What am I then?" "You are what you choose to be," the Alpha replied. "Guardian and wolf, human and spirit, bridge between what was and what must be." Miriam felt the truth of his words settling into her bones like warmth from the sacred fire. She was no longer the frightened, grieving child who had arrived here with nothing but a canvas satchel and a heart full of questions. She was a guardian in the truest sense, protector of wonders that most people would never see, and keeper of balances that maintained the very fabric of reality. Walking back toward the farmhouse, she saw Mrs. Holloway and Tom watching from the kitchen window with expressions of pride and satisfaction. They had helped her become something unprecedented, a guardian who could bridge the gap between ancient wisdom and modern challenges. The new leather satchel waited on the kitchen table, ready to be filled with whatever tools her next lesson might require. But it was no longer the repository of everything she owned. Home was here now, in this place where wolves sang with voices she could understand, and where the very earth pulsed with purpose she was only beginning to comprehend. Miriam Harper, the 7th guardian, opened her journal, a blank leather book that would record her experiences for the 8th guardian who would someday follow in her footsteps, and began to write. Day 93. Today I learned that being chosen for something doesn't mean you're ready for it. It means you're capable of becoming ready, if you're brave enough to let yourself be transformed by what you've been called to protect. Outside, the wolves howled their approval, and the Heart of Hearts pulsed with golden light that promised tomorrow would bring new wonders to guard and new wisdom to discover.